claimed nearly 24 lives. Sadly, heroin overdoses aren't uncommon, but with this many this fast, Channel 11's Alan Jennings has learned the feds are now stepping in to help. And Alan's live at the medical examiner's office in the Strip District with more on this dangerous mix. Alan.
Talking epidemic, David. This killer heroin has chalked up 22 dead already. Medical examiner's office tracking all of this, obviously hoping the numbers don't rise. Today, the feds officially got involved to help track down the peddlers of this stuff. And today, Dr. Cyril Wecht likened this fentanyl-laced heroin to the Grim Reaper.
Problem is, there's no opportunity to cry for help, and you just die.
Dr. Cyril Wecht described for us how the fentanyl-laced heroin instantly cripples and kills.
The two of them acting together have a tremendous effect in depressing the brain. The brain gets depressed, and that leads to respiratory depression, and then a slowing of the heart, and then you've got cardiorespiratory arrhythmia and depression, and the next thing you know, you're dead.
Dr. Wecht appeared this morning on PCNC's Pittsburgh Now show with Chris Moore. County crime experts working under the medical examiner revealed today a second batch of street heroin stamped Bud Ice, seized in a Homestead raid Sunday night, does contain fentanyl.
They appear to contain exactly the same substance, which is a mixture, perhaps half and half, of heroin with fentanyl.
Cyril Wecht thinks the fentanyl was added by a basement drug dealer who did not plan on killing anyone.
The last thing they want to do is get rid of their own customers.
So powerful, fentanyl, according to Wecht, hits the human organs without warning.
Nobody knows that you are in distress. There is no opportunity for anybody to intervene therapeutically and so on, and you die.
The feds just today set up an anonymous tip line. This is a copy of the instructions here asking for the public's help. You can get all the details by logging on to WPXI.com. We're on the case, live at the ME's office in the Strip. Alan Jennings, Channel 11 News.
Well, heroin, as you know, is a very powerful analgesic, and fentanyl is even more powerful in the sense that the quantity required to produce the same kind of analgesia is so much smaller, and it's almost infinitesimal. Apparently, what somebody has come up with is to sprinkle a little bit of fentanyl within the heroin to make his product better than somebody else's. That's the only thing I can figure. Or somebody inadvertently just contaminated. Remember, these are not FDA-approved chemical pharmaceutical laboratories. They don't know what they're doing. It's somebody's basement, right? So these things sometimes happen in a purely accidental fashion. It's not their intent to kill anybody. It's their customers, right? The last thing they want to do is get rid of their own customers. So we have that. And I think this is probably going to pass. I think that it's either what I've just said or maybe a kind of a fad. And the fads are incredible. People come up with, for a while, I remember, they were inserting some stuff, injecting it into their eyes, or rather covering their eyes anyway, to be absorbed faster. I mean, there are things that defy any kind of logical explanation, even if you are into drugs. So it is an aberration. I think it's likely to pass. But the underlying problem that should not be lost sight of is that we are dealing with a major epidemic of drug abuse in America. And one should not just think, well, we've got this heroin, fentanyl problem. Keep in mind that still the vast majority of deaths due to drugs are acute combined drug toxicity, with people taking 4, 5, 6 drugs on average. An antidepressant, an anti-anxiety, a tranquilizer, a sedative, a painkiller. They don't know what they're doing. The combinations defy any kind of therapeutic regimen, and they just pop this and pop that, and the next thing you know, you're dead. I encounter this in all my autopsies that I do for surrounding counties. Of the about 400 and some that I did last year, more than half were due to acute combined drug toxicity. Just think of that. It's incredible. And they come in all sizes and shapes, white and black, old and young, male and female, rich and poor. It's a widespread epidemic, and it's still has to be dealt with. The heroin fentanyl problem, this Thermoflu and this stuff, this is essentially a police problem because it doesn't come from doctors and it doesn't come from pharmacists, and there's no way the doctors and pharmacists can try to do something to ameliorate it. Whereas the acute combined drug toxic deaths, you see, that is not only a police problem, but is even more a problem for physicians and pharmacists who need to be much more careful, doctors in prescribing and pharmacists in dispensing. And there's no reason why, with electronic records today, for example, in pharmacies, that they can't have a computer base that lets them know that Mr. X has been in and picked up here and he's picked up there and so on. There are always going to be people, of course, who forge their names and so on, but most of these are people who get the drugs legitimately one way or another, and that can be dealt with, not completely, but to a great extent, by better care and more careful scrutiny by physicians and pharmacists.
Last question, because you answered everything. If a kid gets a hold of this new strain of heroin, let's say, how much more quickly can it take its toll than for a regular product of heroin?
This product of heroin sprinkled with fentanyl will act much more quickly. It's a simple pharmacological arithmetical effect. I mean, you've got 2 plus 2, and so on. In fact, sometimes from a medical standpoint, 2 plus 2 may equal 7 or 8 instead of just 4, because the two of them acting together have a tremendous effect in depressing the brain. The brain gets depressed, and that leads to respiratory depression, and then a slowing of the heart, and then you've got cardiorespiratory arrhythmia and depression, and the next thing you know, you're dead. And the terrible thing you see about these drug deaths is that unlike even a heart attack or even a beginning stroke or an acute abdominal catastrophe, there's no warning because they just put you to sleep. And so you might say, well, it's a painless death. Yeah, if you want to commit suicide. But the problem is there's no opportunity to cry for help, and you just die. And nobody knows that you are in distress. There is no opportunity for anybody to intervene therapeutically and so on, and you die. And that is the thing that people should keep in mind when they take these drugs, that it's going to put you under, and there's going to be no opportunity for anybody else to know that, because to somebody else, even a close loved one, it's just going to look like you're in a deep slumber.
So the drug chemistry section of my laboratory this morning told me the results of sampling of the stamp bags that are labeled Theraflu and the stamp bags that are labeled Bud Ice. They appear to contain exactly the same substance, which is a mixture, perhaps half and half, of heroin with fentanyl. The powder looks exactly the same in those two different types of stamp bags. The preliminary chemical evaluation of it shows that it's about half and half fentanyl and heroin. So that indicates that somebody has made a large batch of this illegal compound and is putting it out there. And it looks different from the standard heroin that we get into our laboratory. It's a pure white uniform powder, clearly manufactured at one time and distributed as both Theraflu and Bud Ice.
Wow. Doc, I know impossible to tell, right, where this might be coming from. It could be somebody local, could be a cartel out of who knows?
Yeah, well, we're working very carefully now with the county police, with the city police, with the police jurisdictions. There was a large bust made in McKeesport. We're going to be analyzing that material later on today. The key role of this office is to determine what the nature is of the material being seized so that you can direct the overall law enforcement efforts towards finding out exactly where it's coming from. And the next step is to verify that, in fact, it matches what's killing the overdoses, the apparent overdoses we have. So you asked me about the number of overdoses we've had. I'm using 15 right now as more of an approximation, because until we know exactly what drugs are in these people, until we know what drugs were in the paraphernalia we found with them, it's going to take a little while to figure out which ones are part of this upsurge and which are not just our typical overdoses that we get.